Mr. Margolis has 40 years of law enforcement experience, 30 years of consulting on national security issues and planning, primarily in the fields of crisis response, terrorism, and intelligence. He's developed programs for NNSA senior emergency officials, OST, and RAP's mission to manage critical events. He developed the NNSA course for crisis decision-making. He currently serves as a section officer in charge, Transnational Organized Crime, Major Crimes Division, Terrorism Bureau for the Los Angeles Police Department. God bless this man. Please welcome Lieutenant Steve Margolis. Absolutely. As someone said to me earlier, hey, Chief, he's one of us. He's a Q, so he's one of us. God bless you, sir.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to thank those that made this possible, those that had the faith to make me your keynote speaker. This is my first keynote speech. I'm going to tell you that right now. I've taught a lot and I've trained a lot. And so when they said, well, what do you want to speak on? I said, well, normally I teach critical decision making. So I pondered. I said, I'll speak on critical decision making. So with that said, we're going to do a rather interesting magic act. I'm going to do 40 years in 40 minutes. And I'm going to talk to you about my experience from the perspective of having worked in the field as a first responder, and also talk to you about the good, the bad, and the ugly, what I've learned out of those years. And a lot of this is really about lessons from the field, and whether organizations integrate them or not, can't say. But I'm going to talk to you about this through scenarios, because I think through scenarios we understand things much different. So I'm going to start by bringing in some mental models, or my heroes. And they're an unlikely pair. One is Charlie Munger. Anyone familiar with Charlie Munger? Anyone familiar with Warren Buffett? All right, I see a lot of heads nodding. Okay, this is the brain power behind him. This is the guy that went from a mathematician to a lawyer, to an investor, to a billionaire. And he really became my hero when he spoke in 1994 at the USC School of Marshall on business, when he said, what makes his ability a last work, of mental models. He said essentially he has about 100 mental models that he goes into any problem with. That gives him so many points of entry. So many points of entry in terms of how to think about the problem. And by having that, that's enabled him to be successful. And he also gave the admonition, those who don't, who suffer from only a couple mental models in terms of a program, are going to be confined to the shadow aspects of life. Very powerful words. The other unlikely pair with this gentleman is Richard Feynman. You guys know Richard Feynman, right? Right, all right. So, theoretical physicist, probably second greatest physicist in the 20th century. But I was really taken back by him in terms of his advocacy of looking at problems differently. Not going into it with the same mindset, but looking at them differently. And he also brought to the game an idea to make models simple. He said, write it down, teach it to a sixth grader, where you have a gap in terms of your ability to communicate, go back, research it, refine it, rinse and repeat. And so as we walk away from this, what do we have? We have mental models, going at a problem differently, and keep it simple. With that being said, I'm going to keep this about as simple as I'm capable of, which is pretty capable. Some of this stuff is going to be, God, that's just, I got to walk away with that. Some of this stuff is mindless war stories. And some of this you can delete as you listen. So there's something for everybody. I have been with responders for 40 years, so I know that unless I give them something that they can discard and be negative about, it's not a success. So first thing, crisis versus non-crisis. All right, so we have about 9 cells. Which ones are crisis? Name some. Louder? Oil spill in the ocean. What else? Nuclear leak. What else? Stock market crash? Riot? Terrorism? How about police response to a robbery? They do it all the time, right? Is that a crisis? Well, one time a few years back in North Hollywood, we faced people fully armored with fully automatic weapons, and there were 3,000 rounds exchanged. That was a crisis. And what comes out of that is the crisis doesn't always start as a crisis. There's events that come before us that we find out, had we done them differently, we could have averted it. But those are very hard lessons to learn because of the fact that successes are very hard to learn from. We learn oftentimes from our failures. So I'm going to talk about 5 crises. I'm going to talk about how they disrupted the organization, how we solved the wrong problem perfectly, a little bit about recovery, because this is something we still struggle, the concept of coup, and the mental models. One of the crises is self-made. LAPD made it itself. Other is a natural disaster. One was our reliance on specialization and hubris. Other was employees. Employee damage. How could that possibly be a crisis? And the other is the illusion of planning. So I come from an organization that responds to crisis every day. We have about 3 million calls at the end of the year. About 2 million of them are 911. So we're constantly in motion, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned. But we're in our 150th year, and I'm proud to say that we've been repeating lessons learned since 1869. We have the command of a very large geography. Many cities in the United States could actually fit in LA, which gives us a very difficult problem to solve and keep solving. I come from a paramilitary organization. We're very proud of our uniforms. I say that to the folks who are in fire. And the fact is, with a paramilitary organization, you have plus minuses in any equation. The pluses, we have a lot of structure and we have metrics. The minuses, we have a lot of overstructure and the wrong metrics. So when we come into this, I want to talk to you about an organization that's a little resistant to change, even when we learn. So I'm hoping some of this, you'll see the humor in it, some of it's a tragedy, but to understand a lot of this is not personal. 1990, I've been in cop about 10 years. I finally made it in big city policing. They signed me over to the crime analysis unit. And in the crime analysis unit, we were still doing the famous things you'd see on TV, the dots on the map. You know, the pins on the map? That's what we're doing. So they say, hey, would you look at it with the map? I said, sure. Come back to my boss and says, hey, good news. We got some things. We can do some GIS coding. We can do some Bayesian statistics and time series analysis. He looks at me dumbfounded. I said, no, look, we already got the pilot going, it's super good. He says, I'm going to teach you something. Everything you need to know about police work, you can do with a pencil. I hadn't thought about it. And an eraser. Well, at least you acknowledge errors. So I continued forward and dealt with the usual organizational interests where the gentleman in charge decided that the problem might be the computers, so we hid the computers in a closet for a year until the software no longer worked. At that point, I thought it was a good time to do career change, so I went to homicide. In homicide, I went to my boss, and I said, you know, we've been doing the same thing for 20 years. He says, yeah. I says, you know, you might look at some of these systems, and, you know, you work like checklists, like people who have to deal with a lot of variables in the middle of the night. Well, work it up. So I work it up. They implemented it. Then I get cornered by about 4 detectives. And they said, college boy, let me talk to you. I'm 35 at the time. Okay. We've been investigating like this for 20 years. I go, that's my point. And they look at me and go, no, that's our point. I felt like I was trapped in the Monty Python script. And so I said, okay. And then I got my next job. So the organization was good enough to me to decide to do a pivot. March 3rd, 1991, George Holliday filmed an event in Foothill Division. Do you guys know what it was? The Rodney King. He walked into Foothill Division, went to a desk officer, handed him his Sony Cam, and says, you should see this. The desk officer says, not interested. First point of a decision, not interested. He says, no problem. Took it to KTLA. They were very interested. And they showed it every day, 3 to 4 times a day. It was the first case of information going viral. We had a very charismatic boss at the time, Daryl Gates. He invented SWAT, he invented DARE. He was fighting the image that everyone was seeing day in and day out. And this was the first part of the crisis that we had to recognize. Our existing model was the charismatic leader could control the message. 2, organization was too big to fail. Anyone ever hear that before? 3rd was the incident would blow over. The revised model was the frequency of visual technology overwhelmed the message, and it drove the message. Because visuals beat words, and I say that to all of our colleagues that are in public information. And crises have phases, and we didn't know when it began. We do know when it began. We didn't know when it was going to end and what phase was going to be next. Well, this was our next phase, the riots. And 92, we had the riots started, Florence and Normandy. They started as an incident of Reynold Dennings getting dragged out of a truck and beaten in front of the news cameras that were going around in helicopters, recording it and transmitting it live, sending the message that LAPD is not responding. We had 23,000 911 calls that day. Do you think what happened to our systems? Collapsed. Everything collapsed. We went in there thinking we had the sufficient capacity to scale up. We had that the command post, once established, could control the event, that the training models that we put our officers through were adequate. The situation would return to normal just as soon as we put our people in place, and our leadership would continue. We recognized under the revised model, interventions have time sensitivity and sequence. Your CP needed, and this is 90s, folks, our CP didn't have situational awareness, and these were fast-moving events. And they were morphing, they were changing before our eyes. And the press coverage was actually accelerating the problem. We didn't have a revised playbook since the last riots. And it didn't include all the agencies, the all-hazard approach that you're talking about in this conference. We didn't have that mindset. We thought LAPD could handle it. We also didn't put our people through realistic training, essential and needed. And the crisis have distinct properties. We didn't train our people. This was all OJT. We've been handling crises every day since 1869, I know. We didn't have a coup plan. We didn't have a way of even reestablishing normal. We wouldn't have recognized normal, and having been assigned to South Central for 5 years after the riots, we didn't return to normal. There was a political response to a crisis where we thought we were immune to it, and that the crises have legacies. That way, 25 years later, we're still talking about it. Next is the earthquake, and I talk about these from local events because of the DNA that I understand of who the players were, what the decisions were made, and what the outcomes were. This is the unbleached lessons learned. So at 4:30 in the morning, I was near the epicenter. I was woken up by the earthquake as my place was crashing into me. My first instinct was to take care of my parents, who were very old and ill. So think about this. I'm in the affected area, my family's in the affected area, and what is my thought process about returning to work? Just like our chief of police, by the way, at the time, Willie Williams, didn't show up. So like true Hollywood fashion, of course, there's always a weird angle to everything. We have this terrible earthquake. Over 50 people died, and it was the largest property damage outside of Katrina in U.S. history. We have, everyone know about Wes Craven? The guy who does those terrible movies? Yeah. He's filming a film at the time about earthquakes. So he just incorporated the actual earthquake into the film. So there's always, every story in LAPD has a Hollywood angle. So our existing model was that the police could establish a command post and the fire would establish a command post. And we'll keep it separate because we don't want them in our command post and they don't want us in theirs. And then we'll just recall people. You know, they're on A and B watch, they've already been assigned, they'll just show up. First of all, a revised model, walking away, we need something that was all hazards, because everything was happening right after the earthquake. And we didn't know our role as a police, what we were supposed to do. We were never trained in it. Drive around and report stuff, okay. And that personnel would return to work in the affected area. That was a falsehood. That didn't come to be true. And we had to recognize that that was part of our way of working in recovery. Our playbooks were from our last earthquake in the 1970s. So that didn't give us deep insight because we never trained to low-frequency, high-consequent events, and our policies and procedures never reflected that, and we didn't work with fire. Other than we'd show up, and they'd show up, but that was it. We didn't have a coup. In fact, our coup was watching people receive from the Red Cross cluster in increasing volumes of homelessness and trying to police that. So we move on. Now, there's those out there that go, how could that be a crisis? That'd be a crisis. Well, for LAPD, it was. Anyone recognize the gentleman? Anyone have any doubts that he killed Nicole? All right. I'm giving you actual events that I was involved in. So why was this a crisis? And this is kind of interesting for us because we had a robbery homicide division at the time who was our experts of all experts. And this is about expertise and specialization. Well, they felt that they should handle it, and they weren't as tight about policies because why? They were experts. And so what we recognized, we deferred to them, and we thought everything was going great because expertise trumps policy, and adequate policies are in place, and any variance, the experts could explain it away. Well, we watched on TV every day, and those of us who were actually trying to do some work on it realized we were losing that battle, because our big plus was to give the public, and particularly the jury, new science. And we found very quickly the public was not scientifically literate. Now, those that do PI side, you guys know this, you know to explain it along, to the level of people's understanding, but at the time, we didn't. We assumed that they would get it. The DNA would just, its DNA is there. Oh, okay. Well, what does that mean? And we didn't have the models to make it simple enough for everyone to understand. The other thing is context makes a difference. These are our walkaways. Context makes a huge difference. We handled, during that same year, over 2,000 homicides. This was the homicide that nationally damaged our reputation. We couldn't pull it off. And we found out celebrities changed the rules, whether it's medicine or law. Anyone know about the Rampart scandal? Yes, no? Yes? Okay, a few. So we had, working for the world's finest police department, we had one of our great representatives who decided to steal cocaine and associate with another member of the world's finest police department who was robbing banks. And then he had another associate that was planting guns on people. So we had some really exceptional employees, and it all got blown up in the news. And for us as an organization who pride ourselves on doing the right thing and having a stellar reputation, this was a deal killer, because we went in with the wrong mindset, again, because we believed that the influence of bad employees is gone with their termination, that the changes to policies and procedures that we need to do in order to make sure this never happened again would be measured, and that this could be handled internally. What our walkaways were, toxic employees can have reverberating effects that damages the agency's national reputation, and it did. And that organizational change can be mandated. We had a federal judge come in and tell us, this is how LAPD is going to do business from this point forward. There's no room for variance. And the damage of few can profoundly affect the organization. These were, for us, our constant reawakening to seeing the world differently. And the issue is, I remember, going back years and years with the SEO, the concept was always know the message, write the message, control the message, understand the message. We didn't, and we lost it. And LAPD saw, the public saw us as a corrupt organization, despite all the great work. Last, DNC. So this was an operation that we planned for. This is where the crisis of planning. So we planned for this operation. It was going to be in LA. We had it controlled. We had 2 years of planning, 2 solid years, and we were going to control inside of the fence. Does that sound familiar? Inside of the fence. Well, we came on the heels of the WTO, the riots in Seattle, and the anarchists. And they said, we're going to burn LA. We're going to burn LA. But we're not going to go near the fence. They had no plan. And so I get tapped on the shoulder. I was a new lieutenant. They go, we need you to do the operations outside the fence. All right. What do you need? Well, we need a lot. We need a lot. You need to control possibly a lot of protests. How many? We don't know. How many people are coming? 100,000. Okay. How many bodies are you going to give me? As many as you need. But we need you on the ground making this work. I had some other great lieutenants work with me, but I'll tell you, that got me in this business. Everything else before this led up to I'm not going to go through, nor should anyone have to go through, making decisions every second only based on OJT. And I realized that this was my raison d'etre to say, we got to teach people how to make decisions. You can't just rely and get hope. We were using traditional tactics. We maintained control through planning, and that we solved the problem. We solved the wrong problem by having the fence line, but we solved the problem. We walked away with crises have characteristics. They're fast, they're morphing, and often under-resourced. 2, we walked away recognizing you have to be highly flexible in situations of change, and you have to have option sets that you can put in place as quick as you can. Active monitor, feedback of when the problem changes. Feedback of understanding that the problem that you're solving is not the problem it was 2 hours ago. And the necessity of responding immediately and resolving the issues as they come up. And the pace of crisis is so different. And I'm going to talk now about at the personal level. This is at the organizational level. That we end up getting very complacent because we solved the wrong problem. Takeaways, these things you can remember. How do you know if an organization's learned? It's changed its policies, it's changed its culture, it's changed its training. If those haven't changed, good luck. You have to anticipate second-order effects. You have to understand that things have effects on other things and move through that. Training realistic and train to the right problem. Crises have phases. Crises are time-sensitive. Time. Can't say that enough, and I'm going to explain why in terms of your brain. Crises morph over time. You need a large library of crises in your head. You need to recognize patterns. It doesn't have to be the ones you've lived through, but you should have the study of them. Crises are sensitive to competencies and systems. What do I mean by that? This is your warning. A crisis is sensitive to the competency of the decision makers. Let me say that again. It's sensitive to the competency of decision makers. No one wants to hear that. They want to think that it's big enough, you're going to do, that the systems will take care of it. Nah. Because this is a time and place where you've got accelerated decision making. You're going to fall back on familiar patterns because of training or through experience. I mean, it's not something you do every day. And under stress, people end up solving the problems they're familiar with, not the problems that are in front of them. I went into a command post. There was a captain there, and he was overwhelmed with the command post. It was a critical event at our airport. And I looked at him, and I see him on the whiteboard writing things, because that, for him, was something he could control, not the command post, which was out of control. These are things we learned from law enforcement the hard way. We need to train high-risk, low-frequency events. That's the one that keeps the organization out of harm's way. You recognize these 2 events? What are they? Columbine, what else I hear? Mumbai, good. Mumbai and Columbine. 2 interests for me. After the attacks, we got sent over, LAPD, a team of us over to Mumbai to study and work with the guys there. So I got actually to hear the problems they had to deal with. And on Columbine, a dear friend of mine, Dwayne Husley, was the special agent, the supervising agent at Columbine from the FBI, and his son was on the inside. And he was the hostage negotiator. So for him, we taught for about 5 years together. It was very personal. So what comes out of that is that we can learn across events. And what there is a transferability of information. So 2 unlikely events, such as Mumbai and Columbine, have similar issues: active shooters killing innocents, dynamic threat, multiple explosives, multi-agency response. And with each one of those categories, they have a type of decision that needs to be made. And by studying this as crisis managers and emergency managers, it helps us, in terms of the next crisis. I speak after 40 years, but it takes a long time to learn it. But these are things that we've managed to learn. This is, and here we are, teaching the lessons learned from the riots to the Staples Center, the ones that we host a lot of our sports. All right, big questions. Are your playbooks up with the trends? Are your go-to playbooks that tell and operationally how to go, are they up with the emerging trends? I'll tell you, right now with my agency, we're still struggling because the trends are moving quickly. School shootings, anyone familiar with those? I work major crimes. If you're on call as a lieutenant, you have between 6 to 10 calls in the middle of the night of people threatening to shoot up a school. And how old are they? They're kids. They're kids. And people go, gosh, this recently happened because this administration. No, it's been going up since 1850s, exponentially, decade after decade after decade. School shootings. All right, we're no longer in charge of the media. Everyone's the media. Everyone's the blogger. Everyone captures. And the issue is, what does that tell us? Is that our errors are public. There is no secrecy. There is total transparency. We've got a 24/7 news cycle that needs to be fed. Crime's changed. We have a population that moved from 100, it's gone up to 1960 to present about 150 million people. 150 million people in the United States. What would you expect for crime? Nah, it's returned down to the same rates it was in the 1960s. Our bosses are celebrating. They go, you're a genius. We were able to put crime back in the box. Might be your metrics. Might be you're measuring the wrong thing. And we are. Because let's just do a math problem in terms of property losses. Easy thing. Which is more, using our crime data, of accumulated dollar loss? 59,000 bank robberies. That seems like a lot. 88,000 burglaries. That seems like a tremendous amount. 190,000 larcenies. That sounds like a phenomenal amount. Or 2 cases from Transnational Organized Crime. Which do you think has more? The 2 cases. Why? It's big business. It's no longer street robberies. Oh, sure there is. That's, crime's changed. The problem's changed. We have not kept up. We have simply not kept up. So let's get to the very personal. Let's talk about us. We're in a crisis. We're running a show. What happens to a person when they're in high-level stress? Their ability to focus. Does it go up or down? Goes up. Goes up for a little bit, then goes down. How about their ability to take in new information? Goes up, then it goes down. How about their decision-making? Initially, it goes way up, and as they get tired, it goes down. What happens to their confidence in their decision-making? It is straight up, because the brain no longer has a feedback system to tell them about errors. So you find people feeling more confident, making worse decisions. How do you defeat this? Make things visual. Take load off the brain. Don't rely strictly on words. Brain can't process it, can't hold it, can't keep it in short-term memory. Go visual. Visual, and don't make it such a cluster that no one can actually make anything out of what you're trying to do. Think in time frames. Give yourself mental cycles of time frames, because your brain is not a clock. It doesn't take time the same way that a wristwatch or your iPhone. Think, what am I going to do in the next 30 minutes? What am I going to do in the next 2 hours? What am I going to do in the next 8 hours? Then repeat it and ask yourself and constantly reprime your brain with the questions of where you need to be. I got this a long time ago, probably about 30 some odd years ago, from the SWAT team leader. And he was very successful. He's not the most joyous person in the world, but he's very successful at what he did. Another thing I talk to is you've got to have a methodology of how you're solving problems and making decisions. And it has to be systematic. Because when you're dealing in big, high-consequence events, you want to have a defensible model. And you want to have a model that you're not going to lose information and gaps on. And as you see, the first part of it is the most important to see or the problem. You've got to be solving the right problem. So this is definitely a remember. This is what I'm a big advocate on, is you've got to tag the information that's coming into the crisis immediately in terms of your confidence level, code it, and then work it. It either has to be confirmed, unconfirmed, or unknown, because this is going to give you an increasingly accurate map of what problem you solve, give you better insights in terms of the options that you're going to be working, and most important with risk. Everyone goes, how are you going to reduce risk? Are you doing it with math? Reduce uncertainty. You want to reduce uncertainty? Know more about the problem you're solving. Because at the end of the day, all the statistics aren't going to give you necessarily the right answer. Working on defining accurately what problem you're solving gives you better traction. This is the way I break it down. Very simple. It's an upside-down T, and where's our green? Oh, I pray to God this is the, oh, there it goes. It's an upside-down T. On this part you put confirmed, this part you put unknown, this part you put unconfirmed. You notice it's upside-down T. Anyone from the FBI here? Every time I teach it to the FBI, they turn the T around. And I said, stop it. You guys, I know you plagiarize, but you're not doing it on this one. And at least if you're going to plagiarize, keep the T upside down. Anyway, the reason is that most of your information is unconfirmed, right? Right? You have a big unknown, who, what, where, when, and how. And your confirmed information, the stuff that you're treating as facts, is very minimal. So I do it on a scale of 1 to 10, and the reason is, or 0 to 10, and the reason is very simple. Words don't convey the accuracy of prediction. And the CIA's been dealing with this for years and years and years, how to quantify this. To me, it's very straightforward. Your 10 is your confirmed information. It's a fact. Everyone agrees, experts agree, that atomic part of information is a fact. Your unknowns are what? A 0, right? It's a who, what, where. It's already telling you by the nature it's a question, it's a 0. The other statement of fact is on a confidence level 1 to 9. 1 being low, 9 being very high. Confidence level doesn't necessarily mean you can't act on it, but you need to know what the quality of the information you're acting on. Because when you get busy and you talk about a problem, you find your confidence level goes up, independent of the fact that there's no new evidence. And your whole job that you're putting your people through is moving up in the T from unconfirmed to confirmed and unknown to confirmed. So the people who are moving the information forward, they're moving it to greater confidence level to give you greater understanding of the problem you're solving. And I just gave some simple, the confirmed is the suspect staying right now in front of the entrance building X. Unconfirmed, the suspect is moving somewhere around building X. And then the question, where is the suspect now? Very, very simple, very straightforward. Amazingly, I just was talking to some people from Canadian healthcare last night, and we talked about this, and they said, would you come up here and teach our medical students? This is simple. In teams, it works. It's easy to teach, it works fast, and people absolutely change their realization of how much they really know about the problem. Quickly, unconfirmed or confirmed, just yell it out. These words, they're embedded in our language. Believe, I believe. I think. Credible. Probable. 70%. They'd start talking about the consequences of erring on the side of caution. 99%. Instrument shows. That's what the analysts say. I propose. The expert says, do you realize how often that's spoken in a meeting as if it has authority? And you got the intersection between technical data and human judgment. So it's always important to parse this out. I want to thank our fire folks who keep us reminded, this is from our LAFD, about the responders and the nature of risk. This is posted on their academy. We risk nothing to save nothing. We risk a little to save a little. We risk a lot to save a lot. And it keeps us reflective of the people that are going out and putting themselves in harm's way where risk is. So the future is help experts build competency either through resilient communities or the people who have to respond to them. And I saw a lot of the vendors here, they're building on that, and that's where I see the future and the trending in terms of the work we're doing. Don't wait. Start preparing early. That's my son at his first search warrant. I was telling people earlier, I don't know why they have me teaching decision making. I have a 12-year-old. So, with that being said, I want to say from my unit to you folks, thank you, be safe, and live well.